Summer 859. Morocco's coast is calm. Then long, narrow ships appeared. Square sails, shield rows, oars moving like a machine. The watchtower sees it and freezes. The fleet swings in without hesitation. Keels scrape sand. Men pour over the sides, fast disciplined, practiced forming ranks before defenders even reach the shore. They don't settle for a siege. Axes and hammers hit the gate in rotating bursts, wood splinters, iron bends, pressure without pause. When the gate gives, it isn't a trickle, it's a flood. Shields forward, units moving as one, the city's lanes turning into a tight, controlled advance. Summer 859. Off Morocco's coast, silhouettes appear where no one expects them, long, narrow ships with square sails and carved prows. Watchtower guards squint into sea glare, sure it must be merchants, until they notice shield rows along the rails and oars pulling in perfect rhythm. These are Northmen Vikings from cold fjords a world away. In these waters, distance is supposed to mean safety. Yet the fleet keeps closing, calm and deliberate. Sails striped in unfamiliar colors. Orders run down the tower, signal the city. Nekor is no imperial capital, but it is prosperous. Fertile valleys, busy markets, and caravans linking inland Africa to the sea. Its rulers claim Idrisid descent, giving the emir political weight and religious prestige. Scholars study in its mosques. Merchants dock from Al-Andalus and nearby ports. But Nekor's defenses face the mountains and rival tribes, not the horizon. Walls are built for cavalry and siege engines, not for an enemy that can beat ships at dawn, break a gate by noon, and vanish before help can gather. In 859, the western Mediterranean feels like an Islamic sea. The Umayyads in Cordoba watch the straits, and Muslim fleets dominate the main routes. Ports expect pirates, not a northern war armada. So the first rumors sound like mistakes: strange, narrow ships, painted shields, dragon-headed prows. Officials listen, then return to routine. The logic is simple. No northern force would gamble Gibraltar's currents, patrols, and 1,000 miles of hostile coastline. The idea is not frightening. It is absurd. And that certainty becomes a weakness. But this raid is planned. A major Viking expedition recorded in later chronicles and often linked to leaders like Hasting and Björn Ironside has been probing coasts and gathering intelligence as it moves south. They seize pilots, question captives, learn patrol rhythms, and choose targets that cannot coordinate a fast naval response. They do not fight the sea, they read it. They split into smaller groups when it reduces detection, then reunite at prearranged points. Their aim is not conquest. It is shock, speed, and profit before any navy can close the net. And every successful strike buys them food, guides, and confidence to push farther into unfamiliar seas. When Nekor finally reacts, the options collapse into minutes. Riders are sent inland. The coastal garrison is reinforced, enough for smugglers or a small pirate raid, not an army. Watchtowers are ordered to report everything. Then, at dawn, the impossible becomes visible. Dozens of longships in formation, sails patterned, hulls cutting a straight line toward the beach. No negotiation, no warning shots. Oars bite, keels scrape sand, and men pour over the sides with practiced speed, forming ranks while the defenders are still gathering breath. The landing is disciplined. First waves lock shields into a wall while more boats ground behind them. Archers step forward. Axemen form up. Nekor's defenders rush the approaches, but their training is built for familiar threats. Against a moving shield wall, courage becomes thin math. The first line buckles. Survivors fall back toward the gates, hoping stone will slow what open ground could not. Instead, the Vikings keep pressure, pushing uphill in tight units, never letting the city find a stable line or a clear target. At the gates, the Vikings refuse a long siege. They bring tools meant for speed axes, hammers, portable rams. Teams rotate in, striking timber until iron bands bend and wood splits. From above, defenders fire down, drop stones, and try to break the rhythm, but the assault does not pause. When the gate finally bursts, it is not a trickle, it is a flood. Street fighting turns into close-quarter chaos. Small Viking units advance behind shields, clear corners with axes, and force defenders backward through narrow lanes where orders echo and visibility dies. By afternoon, organized resistance collapses into isolated pockets. The raid becomes extraction. Wealth is taken: first coins, silver, jewelry, and compact goods, then captives selected for ransom or sale. Some accounts even claim the Vikings held Nekor for days before departing, their ships heavy with plunder. The city will rebuild walls and markets, but it cannot rebuild the old certainty. If longships can appear here, then no coastline is truly distant. As the sails shrink on the horizon, Nekor is left with a new fear. The sea is no longer a border. It is a road. In the mid-800s, the Mediterranean felt like a controlled sea. Muslim fleets moved between Iberia, North Africa, and the islands with routines that seemed permanent. Ports tracked familiar sails, not surprises. Coastal rulers worried about rivals on land, not strangers from the far north. Most people believed distance itself was a defense: storms, currents, and patrol routes, forming a boundary no outsider could cross without being noticed, intercepted, and erased. Power in this sea wasn't only warships, it was information. Watchtowers signaled, couriers rode, officials compared reports. Trade routes were lifelines, and patrols protected them because trade meant taxes, grain, and stability. In the West, Cordoba's influence reached coastlines and straits. In the East, other courts guarded their waters differently, but the assumption was shared. The Mediterranean had rules, and those rules kept certain enemies outside. Nekor sat where green valleys met the northern Moroccan coast, backed by the Rif Hills. It wasn't an imperial capital, but it was prosperous markets, storage rooms, and merchants linking inland routes to the water. Grain, textiles, oil, and caravan goods flowed through its hands. Its rulers carried religious prestige and local memory and correspondence, giving the emirate legitimacy that mattered as much as walls. But Nekor's defenses were built for the threats it understood. Its soldiers watched roads and passes, not open water. Rival tribes, mountain politics, caravan raids, these shaped budgets and training. A serious navy wasn't ignored out of laziness. It felt unnecessary. No northern fleet was expected to appear here in force. The sea, for Nekor's leaders, was a highway for trade and diplomacy, not a doorway for invasion. Far to the north, Viking raids had already reshaped Atlantic coasts, fast landings, quick plunder, swift departure. But those were northern waters, people said. The straits at Gibraltar were narrow, watched, and dangerous. Currents, rocks, patrols, and distance made a barrier that felt absolute. So rumors of long, narrow ships were treated like dockside exaggerations, pirates, smugglers, misread silhouettes, anything except the one answer that sounded impossible. Then the reports sharpened. A village west along the coast described ships moving with purpose, square sails, rows of oars, hulls built for speed. Not wandering, not trading, not drifting. The details were consistent enough to unsettle experienced ears. Still, responses were slow by necessity. Messages took days, decisions took councils, and councils took time. By the time officials argued over what it meant, the sea had already carried the threat closer. Nekor's leadership tried to act within old assumptions. Reinforce the coastal garrison, enough for pirates, not enough to strip the interior. Send questions to neighbors. Order watchtowers to stay alert. It was logical, measured, and completely mismatched to what was coming. Because this wasn't a small raid testing walls. It was an expedition built on audacity and navigation men who accepted risks others called suicidal, because the reward was a world that hadn't learned to fear them yet. The Vikings who reached these waters did not drift here by chance. They planned, probed, and learned. Along coasts and islands, they tested responses and captured local knowledge currents, patrol habits, safe approaches. They could split into smaller groups, move fast, and vanish onto empty beaches. And their ships were not clumsy river craft. Longships were engineered for open sea light, flexible, and terrifyingly mobile, built by people who measured distance differently. When Nekor's watchtowers finally spotted the fleet clearly, disbelief turned into urgency. Dozens of long, narrow silhouettes moved in coordination, not scattered piracy. Messengers ran, horns sounded, gates were checked, and the coastline filled with men who had never trained for this kind of arrival. The most dangerous moment was the gap between seeing the threat and understanding it. In that gap, fear spreads faster than orders, and a disciplined attacker steals minutes that defenders can never recover. By dawn, the longships closed the final distance. Oars bit the water in steady rhythm. Keels aimed for sand, not harbors. This was the Viking method: land fast, form up, strike before the city's logic can catch up. Nekor's coastal guard line looked up and realized the scale was wrong. Too many ships, too many men, too organized. And behind the first wave, more hulls waited offshore, proof that the sea had delivered not a rumor, but an army. The first clash happens outside the walls. Nekor's coastal garrison forms lines on the rising ground, shields tight, spears forward. They expect a disorderly rush. Instead, they meet something methodical. Viking shield walls advance in measured steps, absorbing missile fire, closing distance without breaking shape. Axes strike when gaps appear, then shields lock again. It is not reckless fury, it is practiced pressure. Within minutes, defenders realize this enemy is not improvising. They are executing a system refined across dozens of coasts. The defenders break first, not from cowardice, but from imbalance. Training meant for cavalry charges and siege engines fails against compact infantry that refuses to scatter. Orders become harder to hear. Men fall back toward the gates, hoping stone walls will restore order. The Vikings do not chase blindly. They keep cohesion, letting retreat create its own chaos. Every step backward compresses Nekor's space, turning open ground into a funnel that favors the attackers. At the gates, resistance stiffens. Archers fire from the walls. Stones drop from above. For a moment, the city feels protected again. But the Vikings do not pause to negotiate or surround the walls. They bring tools forward, axes, hammers, compact rams equipment chosen not for sieges, but for speed. The goal is not patience, it is shock. Strike hard, rotate fighters, and keep the pressure constant until structure gives way. Teams rotate in disciplined cycles. One group strikes, another replaces them without hesitation. The sound echoes through the city, wood splitting, iron bending, orders shouted in unfamiliar words. Nekor's gates were built to resist overland armies, not an enemy that treats time as a weapon. Cracks widen. Iron bands twist. With a final coordinated surge, the structure fails. When the gate collapses, it does not open the city. It exposes it. Inside the walls, the fight becomes something else entirely. Streets narrow. Visibility drops. Sound bounces unpredictably. Viking units break into small groups, advancing behind shields, clearing intersections before pushing deeper. Nekor's defenders know the alleys, but familiarity cannot offset coordination. Every attempt to regroup is met by pressure from another angle. The city's layout, meant for daily life and trade, becomes a maze that favors attackers trained to operate without hesitation. Messages race ahead of the fighting. Every available man is called to defend the inner city. Merchants grab weapons. Craftsmen abandon workshops. Scholars and clerics take positions on walls and rooftops, not as warriors, but as citizens with nowhere left to retreat. This is no longer a skirmish at the coast. It is a struggle for the city's core. And the Vikings are already moving toward its heart. The palace becomes the final anchor of resistance. Guards form a disciplined line on the steps, better equipped and better trained than the city garrison. They understand the stakes. If the palace falls, authority collapses with it. The Vikings understand this too. Their leaders push forward, concentrating force where symbolism and profit align. The clash on the steps is brief, intense, and decisive. When the palace is breached, resistance fractures. The emir is captured alive, not out of mercy, but calculation. A living ruler has value. His family, advisors, and key officials are taken under guard. Without its center, the city loses coherence. Fighting continues in pockets, but coordination is gone. What remains is noise, confusion, and the realization that the balance has already shifted beyond recovery. With organized resistance broken, the raid enters its final phase. This is not conquest. It is extraction. Vikings move methodically through known centers of wealth, treasury rooms, markets, storage houses. Goods are selected for portability and value. Captives are chosen with equal care. Every decision is logistical. Space on a longship is limited. Food is finite. Speed still matters. The goal is to leave richer, not slower. As afternoon fades, the longships pull away from shore. Nekor still stands, but something essential is gone. Walls can be repaired. Markets can reopen. But certainty does not return so easily. The raid has proven that distance offers no guarantee and reputation no shield. From this moment forward, every Mediterranean coast must imagine the horizon differently, not as a boundary, but as an approach. When the last longships vanished beyond the horizon, Nekor began counting what it had lost. The treasury stood empty. Storehouses were stripped of portable wealth. Merchants searched ruined stalls, trying to remember what had been taken and what had simply disappeared in the chaos. Families gathered in courtyards, counting the absent. The city was not destroyed, but it had been hollowed. In a single morning, Nekor learned that survival and security were not the same thing. The emir's capture reshaped everything that followed. A ruler taken alive was leverage, not tragedy. Viking messengers soon carried terms, calculating ransoms with precision rather than cruelty. Gold for the emir. lesser sums for officials, merchants, and skilled captives. Each life had a price, and each price was chosen to be painful but payable. Nekor faced impossible decisions, forced to measure loyalty, status, and love against limited resources. Raising the ransom took time. Loans were negotiated. Allies were pressed for assistance. Tribute was redirected. Wealth that had taken generations to accumulate was melted down and weighed for delivery. When the emir finally returned, he came back alive but diminished. Authority, once taken for granted, now carried the stain of humiliation. Nekor survived, but its political gravity weakened, its confidence permanently altered by the memory of captivity. The response was immediate and expensive. Coastal garrisons expanded. New watchtowers rose along the shore. Patrol boats, once considered unnecessary, became permanent fixtures. Nekor coordinated more closely with neighboring powers, sharing reports of unfamiliar sails and strange hull shapes. These measures restored order, but not innocence. Every lookout now watched the horizon with a question that had never existed before, not if danger could arrive, but when. Beyond Nekor, the shockwaves spread quickly. Merchants carried the story from port to port, each retelling sharpening the fear. Scholars debated its meaning. Poets embroidered it into warning. Some framed the raid as punishment, others as a sign of changing times. What mattered was not the interpretation, but the result. Coastal cities across North Africa and Iberia began questioning assumptions that had felt unbreakable for centuries. In Cordoba, the reaction mixed anger with alarm. That a northern fleet had entered the Mediterranean was bad enough. That it had struck an Islamic emirate on African soil was intolerable. Naval patrols expanded. Shipbuilding accelerated. Warning systems tightened along the coast. These measures were not symbolic. They were admissions. The sea could no longer be controlled by tradition alone. It demanded constant vigilance. The Vikings did not stop at Nekor. The raid was one strike in a wider expedition that tested defenses across the Mediterranean. Some attacks succeeded. Others met resistance. Ships were lost. Men were killed. But the lesson endured. Norse fleets had proven they could operate far beyond the world that once defined them. The Mediterranean was no longer forbiddance. It was contested. For ordinary people along the coast, fear changed shape. The terror once associated with distant Christian lands now felt close and personal. Stories of longships reached fishing villages, markets, and homes. Parents warned children. Guards scanned the sea more often than the road. The horizon, once a symbol of trade and connection, became a source of quiet anxiety. Over time, the story grew. Numbers inflated. Timelines stretched. Some accounts claimed supernatural forces carried the ships south. Others described the Vikings as demons from the sea. But beneath the exaggeration, the core truth remained simple and unsettling. Planning, seamanship, and audacity had carried a northern force into waters thought secure. The myth formed because the reality was harder to accept. Nekor rebuilt and endured, but it never forgot. Watchtowers remained manned. Patrols continued. Generations grew up knowing the sea could deliver the impossible. The raid of 859 did more than sack a city. It collapsed assumptions. It proved that distance is fragile, power temporary, and safety conditional. When Vikings stepped onto an African shore, they didn't just take gold and captives. They changed how an entire world imagined its borders. History doesn't always change through conquest. Sometimes it shifts when assumptions collapse. In 859, Nekor was not destroyed, but certainty was. Distance failed, reputation failed, and a sea believed to be controlled proved open to anyone willing to risk everything. So the question remains, was this raid an extraordinary gamble? Or the moment the Mediterranean learned it was no longer closed? Share your view in the comments. And subscribe for real history where strategy, not myth, explains the past.